In this video, I'll be going over the solutions to the Chapter 9 homework quiz. So when we look at this first question, we want to know the width of the foo paragraph measured in CSS pixels. And here we're going to include the content itself, the padding, the border, and the margin not being part of the element, but we're including this for the width. So to calculate this, first we will take the width itself, right, which is 200 pixels. Then we're going to take the left and right padding, right? That's going to contribute to the total width. So remember, if you have four numbers here, the first one corresponds to the top padding, which is not relevant for the width. The second number corresponds to the right padding, which is. The third number corresponds to the to the bottom padding, and the fourth number and final number corresponds to the left padding, right? So it's just like going clockwise here from midnight, right? So the ones we care about are the 8 of the left padding and the 3 of the right padding, right? Next we'll have the border, and since we only have one number there for the border, we're talking about the border being the same for the top, right, bottom, and left. So they're all going to be 1 pixel, right? And we have that in red. And finally, for the margin, again, we don't care about the top and bottom. We only care about the left and the right. And remember that if you just have two numbers, the first number represents the top and the bottom, while the second number represents the left and the right. Right? So when we add all these numbers together, we have the 200 pixels from the content, the width of that, and then we have the 8 pixels on the left and the 3 pixels on the right for the padding. Right? So now we're up to 211, and then we have 1 pixel on the left for the one pixel for the left border, 1 pixel for the right border. So now we're up to 213, and finally we have the margins, the left margin and the right margin, which are both 5 pixels. So we add those two fives and we have the final answer of 223. Okay, so for the second question, the background color of the element shows through a dashed border. That's true, because remember, the border is actually part of the element itself. The margin's not, so you won't get the background color of the element for the margin, but you will have it for the border. So you're going to see through, if you have a dashed border, you're going to see that background color, just like with the guarantee paragraph. When it was an aquamarine background, we just had the white dashed border there, right? And the aquamarine showed through. Okay, so true or false, most popular browsers allow you to get an image supplied for the background image property by right-clicking and selecting something like Save Image As. That's false. If you had an image element in the HTML, that you can right mouse click and then Save Image As. But for a background image in the CSS, you wouldn't be able to. Okay, the next question, given syntactically correct HTML, blank is used in the CSS to select the blank elements with the Elixir's ID. Well, if it's an ID, right, there should only be one element, or maybe 0 elements, but there should be at most one element with that ID, right? So we're going to use 0 to 1 here. And again, because an ID uniquely identifies elements, or at least it's supposed to if you follow the rules of syntactically correct HTML. And if we wanted to select something with an ID of elixirs, it would be pound elixirs, right? If we didn't have the pound and we didn't have the period, that would just be for an element elixirs. And if we had the period, that's for a class of elixirs. Okay, the next question, which of the following would be the best practice for giving multiple important paragraphs, but not all of them, a red background, and exactly one special paragraph a background image? The special paragraph is also important, so it should always share the styling of the other important paragraphs, a red background in addition to the background image. Right? So if we have multiple important paragraphs, we should be using a class important. And if this special paragraph is also going to be sharing the styles of these important paragraphs, then we should also make that special paragraph belong to the important class. Meanwhile, the special paragraph, since there's only one of them, should probably be given an ID of special. So when we look at the choices, we wouldn't want to give each important paragraph an ID of important. We would not want to add each important paragraph except for the special one to the important class. We want to make all of them belong to the important class. So we would add each important paragraph, including the special one, to the important class, and we would give the special paragraph an ID of special, so that the special paragraph has an ID and also belongs to a class, right? So it's this one right here. And in the CSS, that would mean that we're using .important, and we would use hashtag special, right, or pound special. So it's this one right here. And I just want to, again, emphasize the fact that if we did something like the first option here, and instead of giving the special paragraph here, instead of giving it, making it belong to the important class and have a special ID, we just gave it the ID of special important and gave it the background color of red to match what we're doing for the important paragraphs, and the background image where we use special.jpg, this would work for the current situation. But remember that change is a constant in software development. So we can imagine if we wanted to later change the important paragraphs to have a different background color, the special important paragraph would not update its background color unless we also changed it here. Right, so it would just be another thing we'd have to remember to change, or if someone else is working on the code, they would have to realize that as well. So we're going to do this third option here. Okay, which of the following media directives can be used in the CSS to select color printers and color screens? So if we want to actually select both color printers and color screens, but only color printers and color screens, we shouldn't use this first option here, because doing @media print with the comma here says that we could have monochrome print or color print, right? Either one of them would be selected, and then the other possibility is screen and color. So it wouldn't be this first option here. This third option is also no good. This third option says it simultaneously has to be print and screen and color, right? So this is not what we want here, right? It can't be both print and screen, right? So it actually would wind up selecting nothing. So it's this third option that we would want. We would want print and it's in color, or it's in screen and color. And again, that's different than the second option, which says that for print it could be in color or monochrome, right? There's no extra condition here preventing that possibility. Okay, so this next one here, if you have a list of rules A that applies to browsers having a width of less than 480 pixels and a list of rules B that only applies to browsers with a width of at least 480 pixels and a list of rules C that applies to both, which of the following would be the best practice? So in this situation, we would want to take the common list of rules and put it in its own style sheet, right? Because if we put it in two style sheets here, if we had two style sheets, one for browsers with a width of less than 480 pixels and one for a width of at least 480 pixels, right? Then if we ever winded up changing one of these rules, we would have to change it in both places. So it would be hard to remember, right? So we would want to separate out these list of rules. On the other hand, if we created one style sheet and put all these rules together and we didn't use any CSS media queries, then it would just, all the styles would apply, right, for every device. So we wouldn't want to do that either, right? So the solution here is to create 3 style sheets, one containing the rule C, one containing rules A, and one containing rules B, and we would selectively link in A and B based on media queries. The first one would be linked in unconditionally, whereas the second one, or the second and the third ones, would be linked in depending upon whether the media query was met, right? So one of them would be, we'd have a media query where we'd require that the browser have a width less than 480 pixels, and the other one we would require that the browser have a width of at least 480 pixels, right? And just to also mention, you could also put it in one style sheet and do CSS media queries to selectively pick out the rules that are, or to have CSS media queries that would make it so that certain rules would only be applied for at most 480 pixels, or rather less than 480 pixels, and another media query would say, okay, these rules only apply to the ones that are at least 480 pixels in width. So we could do that in the CSS as well. But if we have a lot of rules for both the small browser width window and the larger browser width window, we might want to separate it into multiple style sheets. Okay, so the next one here. Suppose you link in the following style sheets in the HTML. So this is pretty much doing what I was suggesting in the previous exercise. So we link in a lounge, right? And this gets linked in unconditionally. We have a lounge mobile for ones that have a screen at most 480 pixels. It's a little different than the last one because it was less than 480 pixels. And then we have another one for ones that have at least 481 pixels. Those are only linked in, right? So we have Lounge Mobile for a max width of 480 pixels and a Lounge Desktop for a min width of 481 pixels. Okay, and the Lounge CSS style sheet only has this following rule, right? Specifying that the margins, top, right, bottom, and left should all be 10 pixels. Again, if we only specify one number, then we're saying it for all of them. Lounge Mobile just specifies the margin left and the margin right, saying they both should have 0 pixels, or both be 0 pixels, and the desktop one says the margin right should be 100 pixels. Okay, so if we have a top margin, if we're looking at the top margin on a browser having a width at most 480 pixels, then first of all, the Lounge CSS one is linked in. This other one, Lounge Mobile, is also linked in. The Lounge Desktop will not be, right? So Lounge says that the margin should be 10 pixels. The Lounge Mobile says the margin left and the margin right should be 0 pixels. This does not conflict with the top and the bottom that this is specifying in the Lounge style sheet here. So we're just going to wind up having 10 pixels, right? But in the next day, the left margin on a browser having width at most 480 pixels, then we have conflict here, right? This one says the margin should be 10 pixels. This one, so the margin left should be 10 pixels. This one says the margin left should be 0 pixels. So which one wins? Well, in this case, they both specify just paragraphs, right? So they have the same level of specificity. So the tie would go to the one that comes later. And since this style sheet is linked in after this one, and the browser will combine the style sheets by putting the ones it links in first, those rules above the ones it links in next, right? This rule is going to come later. So this one is going to determine the margin left. And so it's going to be 0 pixels. And by the way, this is also why we would want to link in the common set of styles first, so that if we want to override it in, for let's say, the more specific ones, meaning this one targets more specifically that we're dealing with the mobile, or at least a browser window with at most 480 pixels, we're able to do so because this is linked in later, right? So we would sort of want to give this style sheet the edge in determining things. Of course, if this specified something with a class and it pertained to the paragraph that we were looking at, this one would still win even though it came earlier. The margin left would still be 10 pixels because this would have greater specificity, right? The classes have greater specificity than an element. But at least when they are both the same level of specificity, we could have the ones that are more specific to the browser width that we are constrained in, right? That these rules would take precedence, right? Okay, so the next one, a right margin on a browser having a width more than 480 pixels, right? So in this case, we're linking in Lounge Desktop CSS, right? So that specifies that the margin right should be 100 pixels. So again, that comes in later, so it overrides this margin right of 10 pixels. So this would be 100 pixels, right? And the last one here, the bottom margin on a browser having width more than 480 pixels. Well, again, this doesn't specify it, so we would just use the 10. Right? And that's it.